The world-famous Winter Equestrian Festival, the largest and longest-running horse show in the world, which attracts almost 6,000 horses from all 50 states and 33 countries, and awards over $8 million in prize money, as well as the Adequate Global Dressage Festival, International Equestrian Group, manages the Rolex Central Park Horse Show, and new ventures include the Triumph International Equestrian Center in Tryon, the North Carolina, and the Colorado Horse Park in Parker, Colorado. Bellissimo received his bachelor's degree from Middlebury College and his MBA from Harvard Business School. Bellissimo, along with his daughter Paige, are the co-founders of the Great Charity Challenge, presented by Fidelity Investments, which is run by the Equestrian Sports Production and supported by the Wellington Equestrian Partners. The event has raised more than $8 million in the last 6 years, and more than 100 charities in Palm Beach County have benefited from that. He's also the publisher of the Chronicle of the Horse magazine. Bellissimo is active in a variety of local and national and international charities and a board member of the Palm Beach County Business Development Board. In 2014, he was given the Excalibur Award for Business Leader of the Year in Palm Beach County by Sun Sentinel newspaper. He and his wife Catherine have 4 children, Matthew, Paige, Nicole, and Michael. Please welcome Mark Bellissimo.
Do you have a mic?
I do.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome.
Yeah, we're going to share the mic if we got a mic over there.
Yeah, okay, so we'll share the mic back and forth. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Just to start out, a little background, you might want to talk a little bit about your background and maybe 4 or 5 words to describe you. Is that fair?
Sure.
We'll share the mic until they get the other one fixed.
Okay. I grew up in the Boston area, in a small sort of middle-class town called Natick, Massachusetts, which is about 25 minutes outside of Boston. Grew up and lived there until I was about 16. Ended up going to private school called Phillips Academy, really based on a scholarship, if you will, on playing hockey. So I came from very middle-class background, not a lot of resources, and ended up going to a Middlebury College after that and graduated, and I'll get into some more detail earlier in a few moments. But I think the way I would describe myself is someone that, from my perspective, has had a very different background than a lot of people in sort of the circles I travel now. If you look at sort of the equestrian world, it is a lot of generational wealth. There's a lot of people that have had very different business experiences, very different upbringing. And so from my perspective, when people describe me, it's sort of resilient, it's innovative, entrepreneurial. I think I'm touched by Bill's comments about sort of, what I would think to be a very high set of standards that you set for someone. But I think from my perspective, the ultimate goal from my perspective is to really create an environment in which my employees can thrive, we can thrive, and have a big impact on the community. So,
You didn't start in this area.
Yep.
You started differently with businesses, correct?
Yes.
How did you get started, and what did you notice as you started growing up and getting more involved in businesses?
Well, what I'd say is my first business experience was actually a fundamental of my upbringing. So I grew up, again, as I said, in a middle-class background. My father actually was a person who had run a number of small businesses, but was really just doing some a business, which was if you look at the canteen trucks that operate and in most construction sites and things like that. I mean, that was sort of the way my early exposure to business was just a single father that was actually going through a small business environment. I was one of 6 kids. and lived in a very small home, about 1,800, 1,700 square foot home, one bathroom, very, very different experience. And I saw a man who just really worked amazingly hard to really accomplish one thing, and that's to educate his children. And so his fixation was on nothing more than trying to figure out a way to get his kids into the best schools. And what his mechanism for that was actually through athletics. So all of us were sort of athletes in some way, and the focus from his perspective is to try to build a lot of character through sports and build character through learning sort of the principles of teamwork and whatnot. And so he was someone that, from my perspective, had a lot of character as an individual, but had absolutely no wealth. He was, if you looked at him, he was always wearing our team jackets and really didn't have any particular interest in I think the things that people are very interested in the circles I travel, which is sort of wealth and stature and privilege. And so from my perspective, I worked with in just observing that opportunity. Ended up having some early experiences in starting my own business in college and just made some money to sort of support myself. But what was the most profound experience for me after college was that my father's business, which grew in a very organic way from one truck to 5 trucks, and then he turned it into an institutional food service business. It grew and it became a small business that was probably sort of $10 million business with 50 or 60 employees. I ended up going to Andover, getting into Middlebury, got a great job after college. It's funny, one of the folks that is here, Derek Wenger, was actually, I haven't seen him in 20 years, actually was my first job. I worked on Wall Street, which was a fantastic opportunity for me. But in that context of that position, my father's business ended up going through bankruptcy. And so I worked at Credit Suisse for a number of years. I had a really interesting job. It was on Wall Street during a very, very exciting time. And I ended up leaving that job with my brother, who actually was working at Chase Manhattan at the time. And we actually went back and essentially rescued my father's family business, which at the time had gone through a time where he had grown the business. He had brought in some leaders and managers who didn't necessarily know how to run a bigger business. And he put his house up on the market. And, as part of a loan, guaranteed it through a local bank, and essentially was on the verge of him losing his home. So my brother and I made a decision to leave our businesses, which at the time were very, very high profile and very sexy. So we were working on Wall Street and doing all the things that were great as a 22-year-old, and both decided that we were going to leave the business and really get a little payback for my father, because he was at a point where he was about to lose everything that he had worked for. And so we left, went back and went into a bankruptcy situation that was very challenging, and it was at the verge of failure. And essentially the bankruptcy judge at the time sort of said, I'm going to give this 9 months. And if these 2 guys want to come back, and I remember the bankruptcy judge's great quote was, we'll let this happen and we'll see whether hope can in fact give birth to reality, and whether these 2 guys can rescue their father's business. So we worked for 9 months, amazingly diligently, and in a very unwinnable situation, what we thought at the time. And it was one of these situations where every month we had to present numbers to the bankruptcy court, and if we passed a cash flow test, we were able to sort of go into the next month, et cetera. And after 9 months, we were able to achieve that success. What's very interesting about that experience is what I learned about myself, what I learned about business, what I learned about people. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of that gets lost in sort of what are big transactions and big stories. What's written in many ways are about the big deals, and the $20 billion deal, and the $50 billion deal, and the $100 billion deal. And in what really gets lost is, how America works. And in America, 70% of the jobs are from small businesses, and those small businesses are a lot of the people that live and work and eat and drink and die in every town in America. And I was able to learn amazing skills around dealing with people, and I think in many ways we had a great opportunity to provide some payback. We didn't get any money. It was a time I actually met my wife, who I've been married to for 27 years. It was a time when she was sort of having a great time in sort of her personal life, and in the end I was at a place where I had a job that was very successful on Wall Street, and I came home and I wasn't getting paid. I didn't have, I was literally just working within an environment and, trying to cultivate a relationship. I said, well, listen, I can't go out. I'm not going to go out to dinner. I have to work till 12 o'clock tonight. And part of relationship with my wife really transcends that activity, because instead of her saying, well, I want to go out and party, I want to go whatever, she's like, well, I'll help you. And so we would go to our office and she would do data entry, she would do whatever, and for months and months at a time, that was our relationship. And it was, to me, very, very compelling and powerful, because it was a type of situation where I really didn't have any resources. I'm sort of in a situation where my father could lose his house. A lot of what had been worked for was there. I just quit my job on Wall Street, and I was in this really terrible business by everyone's relative. It was in a terrible warehouse, and it was just a really crazy experience. But from a character perspective, what was really interesting is the connection I have with my wife, who's a very important part of my being and my whole character, was developed there. And so I know what she's all about, because in the end, it's not about money, it's not about sort of fame and fortune, it's about sort of how you take care of each other. And I think in general, that was a very, very telling experience for me. And I'll turn this into something, I'll get more interactive, but to give you a basis for that, we were successful. The only reason I got into Harvard Business School is I didn't have any connections, and a lot of times it's a meritocracy in some ways, but it's nice to have great experiences. A lot of the people that go to Harvard Business School, 30% come from Wall Street, and 30% come from consulting, and 30% come from this manufacturing, and then there's this small group of people that have really interesting experiences. And the experience that I had was very, very different, because it was an experience that had a little bit of a sort of a Wall Street experience, but had more of an experience that was very, very crazy, because how many 25-year-olds, 26-year-olds get involved in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy and end up going through that Chapter 11 bankruptcy to protect their father, and then are able to actually be successful. We sold the business, and it was very, very interesting. But the impact that had on my life was far, far greater than anything I learned at Andover, anything I learned at Middlebury, anything I learned at Harvard Business School. Because what you learned was the only real way to be successful is to really energize people and get them aligned around a common vision and a passion, but that it's not about you. It's not about the entitlement. It's not about making me successful. It's making us successful. And so a lot of the comments or a lot of the things that I learned there was literally in this place that was a dumpy warehouse with, really, you could not characterize a worse working environment that my wife would come to, and she'd have to worry that, a rat wouldn't come out or something, in terms of, the environment. But I think in general, and just to bring it all to closure, I had a 50th birthday party a couple of years ago. And my wife surprised me with it, and it was essentially all my business partners, and it almost came as a testimony. It was a really memorable moment. I'll never forget it. But what was interesting, all my kids had come up with a series of quotes. And they said, Dad, these are Markisms, and these are all the quotes that they had put together. And then they just did this storybook of pictures and all these different things. It was very, very, very touching. And all my partners came up and talked about it. But the 6 quotes that I remember that will sort of thread into this conversation really centered around, a lot of the principles that I believe in that are the critical factors for success. And they do tie back to people. And the first one was,